On to the UK, British voters are set to decide the fate of Brexit after Parliament backed a general election, which is now slated to take place on the 12th of December. It's likely to be the most momentous for a generation. Right now, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is taking questions in the Parliament.
Look to the future, even one who is retiring from the House. Can I ask my right honourable friend to give me some clarity on what
the political parties have started preparing for the general election campaign after the lawmakers passed the election bill by 438 to 20 votes. Now, the legislation approved by the parliamentarians will later begin its passage through the House of Lords, where it is not expected to be opposed. The leaders of the country's two largest parties, Conservative Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Labour opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn, have welcomed the move, but the stakes for both could not be higher. Now, this 6-week race could forever alter Britain's relationship with Europe and its place on the global map. The Labour Party has already tweeted out that their electoral campaign will have the slogan, "It is time for real change." That video has already been put out. Jeremy Corbyn is ready to campaign all across Britain, including in Boris Johnson's home constituency in suburban London. Corbyn has proven himself to be a surprisingly effective campaigner against Theresa May in 2017, but he remains a rather unpopular figure across the country. Now, some members of the Labour Party worry that an election is a prescription for defeat for the Labour Party. The risks are equally high. The party is deeply divided over Brexit, with some of its members ardent proponents of leaving the EU, while others are equally passionate about staying. So what happens next is that the Parliament has approved that bill, and the UK is now looking at winter elections. The early parliamentary general election bill will be debated in the House of Lords. If the upper house makes any amendments, the bill will go back to the House of Commons for members of Parliament to vote on the changes. Once the bill is passed, it will receive royal assent. The Queen will formally agree to make the bill a law. On the 4th of November, the lawmakers will vote for a new Speaker of the House to replace John Bercow. Just after midnight on the 6th of November, the Parliament will be dissolved, officially kicking off the elections. 5 weeks later, on the 12th of December, Britain will vote in the first December general election that has been witnessed there since 1923. Our correspondent Natalie Powell is now joining us live on the broadcast. Many have said that an election taking place in December is nowhere at the end of uncertainty for the UK. If no party wins majority, it could mean that the UK is back to square one.
General consensus is that this is likely to be the most unpredictable election in recent British history. We are 43 days away from going to the polls here in the UK. That election taking place on the 12th of December. We are likely to have the results of it on Friday, the 13th of December. Many of these parties involved will be hoping that is a good omen and not a bad omen. Of course, the party lines are being drawn on whether you are a Remainer or a Brexiteer, it would seem. Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, coming out and saying that this is an opportunity for the government, for the country to get Brexit done. If he wins an overall majority, that means that his withdrawal agreement bill should be able to go through because he will have a majority in Parliament, and then the UK will be able to leave the EU by the 31st of January, that deadline that has recently been moved back. Interestingly, though, the leader of the opposition party, Labour, that's Jeremy Corbyn, has said that this is a once-in-a-generation vote, and he is ready to go out and hit the campaigning trail with it. We've also, though, heard from other parties like the Liberal Democrats, who are really putting themselves out there as the Remainer party, and they are now in talks with other parties that have been very outspoken in their Remainer message, that potentially we may actually see some tactical alliances being formed among those Remainer parties. So all to play for in the run-up to this general election.
Right, and when those legislations were being debated upon inside the UK Parliament, we'd seen thousands take to the streets asking for another referendum to take place, saying that they no longer want Brexit to actually see the light of the day. Natalie, give us a better sense of what the people on the ground have been saying and reacting to this decision that is being taken to hold fresh elections.
Well, the UK is incredibly divided over the subject of Brexit. It has been for the past 3 years since the EU referendum took place in 2016, of course. And I don't think that much has changed. People tend to have really started to form those ideas much more strongly than they had before, whether they want to remain in the EU or leave the EU. In terms of a general election, well, I think the general consensus is that something needs to be done to break the deadlock. But whether the public agree that a general election is the right thing to do, we'll just have to wait and see. A December general election is rather unusual. We haven't seen one here in the UK since 1923, and there are big concerns that a lot of voters won't have the time to come out, or that it will be too cold here in the UK for them to come out. There's also a big question over whether students will be able to vote. Those students that don't live at home, for example, that have gone away to university, who may be registered to vote in their university constituency, may actually go home for the December holidays and therefore won't be registered to vote on the 12th of December, where they will actually be. And this is all a big concern about what's going to happen, because we also know that there are certain parties that attract an older vote, certain parties that attract a younger vote. But in addition to that, we also know that it was the older voters that tended to vote in favour of Brexit, the younger voters voting for remaining in the EU.
Very interesting. We're going to leave it there for the moment, though. Natalie, appreciate very much for joining us with those updates.